Okay, so I'm picking up where I left off before. And as you'll notice, I still have all of my layers here. I have my person of interest, and I placed them in the middle of my paper. I placed, in my case, a black solid layer on top. And when I did that, I just used my little paint bucket on the side here. And then I chose 4 different words in an appropriate font of my choice. They're all on different layers, as you can tell. And I chose this funky green font just so I could see it really well. My dancer definitely doesn't have any green in her body, so I thought it would help me see it better. So you can pick whatever color you want. It's really just temporary, so you know what makes the process easier. So I've got about 3 or 4 different techniques that are going to work for us today. Guys, can you make sure you minimize, please? Thank you. So, first of all, I need to be able to see my dancer somewhat, but I want some of the black to still remain in my background. What could I do so my black is a little bit more see-through? Go ahead, Zoe. Perfect. So I'm going to click on my black layer here, and in my layer panel, you've got your opacity slider here. I usually go down to like the 35-ish, 40 region. That's usually pretty good for us. So that way I remember it's there, but it's not like totally gone. Okay. So that's my first step. Second thing I like to do is I want to make sure I don't move my person. As I start adding all this text on top, I'm almost tracing them in a sense. So I don't want to move that piece underneath. So if I just click on my ballet dancer and then I click in this little padlock in the layer panel, now this person cannot move, which makes life much easier for us. You could always unlock it later if you want to. Any questions about that stuff? Basic. Alrighty, here's where we begin. Now, I've got all these words, which is great, but I want to get to the point where I'm going to treat them as photos from this point on. I don't want to adjust the text, the font. I know they're spelled correctly, so I don't want to edit them anymore. What can I do that tells Photoshop, like, hey, I want you to treat this as a photo? What was that term that's got a funky kind of name? Sometimes we do it with a photo that says it's a smart object. Yes, great. You're going to rasterize it. So you just right click on the name of each one and click rasterize type, and you'll notice that it turns to this kind of checkered box. Alrighty, they are rasterized. Okay, here's where the fun starts. So I'm going to start with a word of my choice. Maybe I'll start with like ballet. I'm going to duplicate the layer. Okay, it places it right on top. Oops, as you can tell, wrong layer. Maybe I'll even lock my black layer too. So I'm going to use ballet as my first word. And I have to decide where I want to place it on my person. And I want it to also exemplify this person's shape, their pose, perhaps their muscles or their clothing. It's going to help me illustrate the image. So maybe I'll start with like an arm here. So first thing I have to do, her arm's a little bit more vertical. What should I do with the text direction? Yeah, definitely. So let's Control T. Let's rotate it first. It's okay if it hangs off a little bit, but I want it to be in kind of the ballpark. I was kind of lucky it fit, but maybe I'll do something like that. All right. Now, here's where all of the fun distortion things we haven't learned yet come into play. There's lots of ways we can distort it. One of the ones you may remember is using Control T and then your warp with this little icon at the top. I like to call the windshield wipers. And I could go in here, and this tends to be a fan favorite, to pull these little pieces over. And let's zoom in so you can really see what I'm doing. And I really want to outline her muscles. So I'm really trying to pull back and forth here to trace the shape of it a little bit. Maybe I'm even going to move this kind of B for where her shoulder area is. And I'm going to push in the bottom of the B here so it doesn't hang outside of her hand. So that's one cool option. You could use your transform tool. It's not ideal for me because I wish this A sort of reached the outside part of her arms here. So there's more we could do, I promise. We could go in and do edit, transform, distort. Unfortunately, not a shortcut on there for you to do that one, but that's okay. You could go in and pull certain ways. As you can tell, you could distort that way. Kind of puts things more on a slant. Not my personal fave, but it's an option for you. It just kind of loosens up the square a little bit. Last one, which is my personal fave, is called Liquify. And Liquify is under the filter menu. It's got a shortcut here, Shift Control X. Give it a sec. And as you can tell, we're going to show up in this screen here. I'm going to zoom in my lower left-hand corner. And there's a lot of fun things you could do with this one, which is cool. Here's where the new stuff begins. I don't use all of these. Twirl clockwise is probably not what I want to do with my text. It's probably not as legible. I've got a pucker tool, so if I want to make something a little bit smaller in an area, I can stretch and minimize in certain areas. That one I'm not wild about, so I'm going to undo a little bit. I've got the bloat tool, which will make things bigger in an area. So I'm going to click on this A here because I want to blow it up like that. I want to blow my E up a little bit too. There's a push to the left or the right where I can pull certain elements and make them larger. It's in a preview mode, and that's why you're seeing all of this. I don't tend to use the freeze masks or the face tool because we're not really working on a face. I've got the forward warp at the top here too, and that can help shove and kind of widen things so you can see. I like that one a lot because it kind of stretches the area a little bit. Maybe I'll stretch these L's to the edge of her hand. So I'm trying to create more of an outline essentially along the shape of her arm and I guess which is the beginning of her shoulder. And then I can press OK. And as you can see, I can start to distort them in a way where they're starting to create an outline around her body. I'm not super wild when I get a ton of a blur if it's a huge adjustment, but I know sometimes that's going to happen. So it's okay. I get it. And we can always go back and adjust as time goes on. Do you have any questions about those 4 techniques? I actually have a list on Classroom because I know that's hard to remember. So I made a list here of all the different techniques I used here, just in case you forget. And the idea is we're just going to continue and take our word we're interested in again. We're going to duplicate it again. So I'm using dancer. Copy it, rotate it, and I'm starting to fill in the body. I'd start with like a bigger area and then start to work your way outward. I do expect you to get into these small details, even like the hand, the fingers on the hand. Perhaps I would go around here, around like her dress, and distort this in a way where it echoes like the cut of her dress. That could be kind of cool too. So in this case, like the D kind of hangs off her chest, so I could sort of push that guy in. And I could adjust like the part of her shirt here, adjust part of the N here. So I could start filling in those areas, pushing the A down a little bit so it echoes like the shape of her shirt. I know I don't have all of it, obviously, but just to give you a 2-second version here, I want it to help echo the shape of what we're seeing. Again, I'd put more time into that, but you can get to see them starting to fill in different areas and echo the outline of their body. Do you have any questions so far? If you don't like the first few, don't worry about it. It's really easy to just delete them. And basically, when we get to the end, all of these green letters will turn see-through, and we'll have a black background, and it will allow the color of her red dress, her skin tone, her hair, etc., to shine through, which will be very exciting. Any questions so far? All right, cool. Let's get going and take your time. I'll be floating around in a sec.